Kia ora, good evening. The completion of the rebuild of Stadium Southland has again been pushed back, with the project now looking to be finished 18 months after its original target date. The rebuild comes after the stadium collapsed in a snowstorm in September 2010. Sarah Bedford looks at why the project has been delayed.
The rebuild of Stadium Southland has been delayed yet again, with the completion date being pushed out a further 3 months. The redevelopment had been expected to be completed by July 25th, but that's been revised to late October. Since the rebuild began, the completion date has changed half a dozen times. Southland and Leisure Centre Charitable Trust Deputy Chair Alan Dennis says this delay is due to work being required in the core block.
The core block wasn't assessed after the initial collapse. So we wanted to make sure that we understood to what degree it was earthquake proof, and we found out unfortunately it was less than 30% under the new earthquake code. So we wanted to make sure that we knew what exactly we had to do in the regard of engineering and so on to bring it up to 100% earthquake code.
The assessment of the core was done due to concerns about the build and overall earthquake standards. Mr Dennis says the assessment was not done until December, as concern had earlier been around the part of the building which had collapsed.
People were mostly concerned about what was actually collapsed, and it didn't show significant signs of being affected by the original collapse. In other words, I think the insurance company felt that it was basically intact, and of course that's not proven to be the case.
Until now, the Trust had been confident the rebuild would meet the completion date, so why has this changed?
What we've just recently found out through the scoping of the job of work is that it was underestimated, and the scope and the extent of the work that needs done to bring the stage or the core block up to current code is significantly more than what was first thought. And we've only just found that out after waiting for just over 2 months for that to be designed and peer reviewed and costed.
Mr Dennis says he doesn't believe there is anyone to blame for this delay.
Obviously people look to finger pointing, but in my experience this is just one of those things that happens. It's unfortunate, and I don't believe that anyone could have had a crystal ball to realise that something that was perceived to be untouched during the fall required so much remedial work, in fact a complete rebuild.
Stadium Southland manager Nigel Scout says the delay has affected 8 to 10 events which had been booked.
Well, obviously we had the International Netball Test, New Zealand, Australia. We are working hard with Netball New Zealand though around that, so it hasn't completely gone yet, so we're looking at some other ways how we might be able to assist with that particular one, because it has a huge significance to the community. Obviously the Lion Foundation Division 1 netball competition, week-long tournament late September, that has to go because we simply haven't got the infrastructure in place for that. We had an international artist coming out which we hadn't announced, which we obviously can't utilise that. And we've got things like the Polyfest and 1 or 2 others that we're trying to transfer into the Velodrome at the moment.
He says this may have some bearing on people choosing to come back to Stadium Southland, but there's also been loyalty to the province. The delay means an expected loss of around $100,000 to $150,000 from loss of events, while the work on the core block will cost around $1.6 million. The rebuild is expected to cost between $39 and $43 million, but among other challenges facing the project, a funding shortfall remains. An estimated new completion date of late October has now been set, but it's a best estimate at the moment. Sarah Bedford, South Today News.
Talks between Meridian Energy and the owners of the Tiwai aluminium smelter resumed in Wellington today, with the companies discussing their power supply agreement. The smelter's viability has taken a hit due to falls in aluminium prices and the high dollar. Negotiations to bring down the price of a long-term power contract have been ongoing for the past 9 months. The smelter 6 years ago signed a new contract with Meridian, which recently came into effect. The smelter has previously said it needs prices to come down to be viable. Negotiations are expected to take the remainder of the week. The Tiwai Point aluminium smelter accounts for a significant portion of business at Southport and Bluff. Southport Chief Executive Mark O'Connor says the port is very concerned about the situation at the smelter. Sarah Bedford spoke to him about what impact could be seen if the smelter were to close.
There's 2 main areas of our operation that overlap with the smelter's business, and the first one is the provision of the infrastructure where they exchange their cargo, and that's the Tiwai Wharf and the access bridge connecting the Tiwai Peninsula We provide that to NZAS under a long-term licence or lease, and that lease obligation has some time still to run. The other part of our business that's variable in nature is the marine activity, where the ships come and go relating to the NZAS cargo transfer, and that would certainly be directly impacted.
Economically, what would it mean for you guys?
Well, to give you some context, the smelters cargo represents around 40% of our total cargo mix. Last year we handled 2.7 million tonnes in total, and the smelters proportion of that was around 1 million tonnes. So we've fortunately been able to grow our business over the last 5 years, and that cargo pie is increasing. So the TY proportion has been larger in the past, and it has shrunk more recently in relative terms, but it's still a big chunk of the total pie.
So you have seen some impact already at Southport with TY reducing their production?
Yes, we have. Over the last 18 months, they've taken capacity out, partly due to cost efficiencies, and then more recently due to electricity shortages and low lake levels. So we've seen that factor with reduced marine activity and reduced volume.
Are you preparing for the worst?
Look, we're still optimistic that the team at NZAS and Pacific Aluminium can work their way through the minefield and negotiate a suitable deal with Meridian. So we're not pessimistic, although the situation is very serious. We're hopeful that the two parties can see a commercial way forward.
After the break, electronic spending takes a hit. We have a look at what role Easter may have played. Welcome back. Electronic card transactions fell last month, with the retail sector taking a hit. The value of electronic card spending in retail industries fell 0.5% in March, according to seasonally adjusted figures released by Statistics New Zealand today. The largest decrease was in apparel, down 6.2%, while fuel and hospitality both increased 1.4%. It's thought Good Friday and Easter Sunday had an impact on spending, with 2 fewer trading days compared to a typical March month. Compared with February, total electronic card transactions fell 1.2%. The Southern District Health Board is not meeting national targets in a range of areas, according to an agenda being discussed by the Hospital Advisory Committee this afternoon. Reports to the Ministry of Health being tabled in that meeting show for February the Southern DHB did not meet 2 key national targets, including improved access to first specialist appointments or for providing timely surgery. 61 patients have waited more than 6 months for their first specialist appointment, and 63 patients have waited longer than 6 months for treatment after it was approved. For the year to date, the Southern DHB is 13% below target for improved access to elective services. However, the DHB is meeting targets in 12 other areas. Residential property values have risen 6.5% nationally over the past year, but in Southland it's still a mixed bag. According to QV, residential house values rose 6.5% nationally in the year to March, while Southland fell close to 3.5%. Invercargill rose close to 2% and Gore rose more than 2%. Nationally, values are 3.3% above the previous market peak of 2007, but this isn't the case in much of the south. In Southland, values are 11% below their 2007 peak. Invercargill is 7% below, while Gore has seen improvement, up almost 4% on that peak. More than 4% of New Zealand youths smoke every day, according to a survey by advocacy group Action on Smoking and Health. The number of Year 10 students smoking each day was 4.1% in 2012, according to the ASH Year 10 survey of 30,000 young people. It's the first time in the survey's 14-year history where there's been no drop in daily youth smoking. ASH says government spending cuts in tobacco control and inadequate tax increases are hampering the ability to reduce smoking rates. In the Southern District Health Board area, the number of daily smokers was 4.3%, while 7.2% identified as regular smokers. Changes to New Zealand's social welfare system were narrowly passed in Parliament last night. The new law, which takes effect from July, requires job seekers on benefits to be drug-free and will allow benefits to be stopped for those with outstanding arrest warrants. We hit the streets of Invercargill today to gauge reaction.
You know, if it's for an unpaid parking fine, why would you cut their benefit? People probably can't afford to pay the fine, but if it's a criminal offence, certainly it should be looked at.
Well, I suppose it pays you keep out of trouble, doesn't it?
They've just got to be treated like anyone else, so obviously you would have consequences for your actions.
Good idea. It's about time they did something like that.
Well, they should have turned up to court on their day.
I suppose that's a pretty good idea. Why should criminals be getting my tax money?
You know, if you got a warrant out for your arrest, you obviously should be in jail or are heading that way. So it's only fair that your benefit should be cut. I mean, it's a bit unfair to people who actually need the benefit and, you know, trying to do something with their lives, trying to get some money to help them out, and there's just people running around with warrants for their arrest, just still claiming benefit monies.
I think that's fair enough. Yeah, because you've got to go to court, face up to what they've done.
What about if they are a job seeker on the benefit and they have to be drug-free?
I agree with that too. I reckon that you've got to have your faculties with you if you want to get a job.
Well, actually, I do agree. Because, I mean, why should us as a taxpayer pay for supporting their habits? I think instead of getting money and that sort of thing, they should be giving chips for groceries, chips for petrol, chips for whatever, you know, just for the essentials of life rather than the luxuries of life.
What about those receiving a benefit who are job seekers having to be drug-free?
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that.
Yeah, well, most people have to be drug-free nowadays if they want to go into employment, so I do agree with that.
Yeah, that's fair enough as well, you know, like any kind of customer service, you don't want people, you want them to be sober and on the mark, so yeah, that makes sense.
That's from news. Coming up in sport, the Blues' Renee Ranger and Highlander Colin Slade. That's after the weather next. Good night.